really just total pure joy for me, a labor of love. And I try and stay curious about the world. I've had numerous experiences where I stop because something tickles my curiosity in just a little small way, a little flicker of light, a little shadow here, and then I go over and I look at it more carefully, and sometimes a visual surprise blooms out of that. And being in the right place at the right time and paying attention can be a key component to seeing. I was standing on a street corner and this car drove by and the light changed and the car stopped and this cool dog was sticking his head out the window, and I had my camera with me and there it was. My exploring is open-ended. As I said, I just wander through the world looking, and I like to share what I see in whatever way I can, like presentations like this or participating in exhibits. Although that's not my aim, really. It's all about seeing and then expressing that through the camera. This image, when I was living in New York, I would get an hour for lunch. I would go out every day, eat real quick, run out the door, spend 40 minutes looking. One day it was raining and I said, nah, I'm not going out. And then I said, well, hang on 1 second. You know, don't rule anything out. Go out. So I went out. I went down the end of the street. I'd been walking this street to and from work for 13 years. And when I got to the end of the street, there was a dry patch in the sidewalk where there was an overhang. So I stepped in there. And then I looked up and the overhang was had a metal covering over it, and there was a reflection of what was going on the sidewalk in that overhang. And so I stood there for my entire lunch hour, and this couple came along to give me that interesting umbrella photo. So that's a little bit of my work. How did
Hey,
it all?
Warren.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. This is Tina. I was going to ask a question.
Mm-hmm.
So on your street photography, like maybe the previous shot, if you're just waiting, I mean, of course, if are you shooting in manual, or do you have a setting that is your go-to setting for just sitting there waiting for something to happen? Does that make
Well,
sense?
yeah, it seems like it's two questions. The first question is, I'm sort of not waiting. I'm not anticipating. I'm just walking along. For instance, this was on another lunch hour, walking up. And because a lot of these hit me very hard, I remember this particular moment. I'm walking up 7th Avenue. It's in the fall. There's the sun is just going over the roof of the building, and it's creating this edge on a table, a shadow edge on the table that's sitting out on the sidewalk. And I just happened to be walking by, and when I turned and looked, that red flower gobsmacked me. And then I looked and I saw the lines of the edges of the table and the way that the settings were placed out and the vase and that table in the background. And I just said, wow. I mean, it was like this wonderful manifestation of a visual connection that came out of nowhere. I had no forethought. I didn't even see it coming. I just happened to turn and look, and there it was. Now I shoot everything with, I don't have my camera. Hang on 1 second. I want to show you this. Sorry, I should have thought of this. I've always shot with a small compact camera.
Wow.
That's what I'm shooting with right now. It's a Sony RX100-7. It's got a 24 to 200 zoom, a high-end Zeiss lens in it. It takes fabulous images, and it fits into a little case that sits on my my belt loop. And so I can walk around with my camera on my side all the time. So I'm never worrying about carrying. I used to have a digital SLR, and it was just too bulky for what I do, which is to walk around, especially when I was living in the city. There was endless opportunity. So, and then when I get ready to shoot, in this particular case, oftentimes I'm shooting on program mode. And it will, the camera will choose the aperture and shutter setting, and all I have to do is focus and shoot. Sometimes if I'm looking at this, I may switch to aperture setting because I want that table in the background to be in focus, or maybe I don't, and I run the aperture up or down depending on how what I'm seeing and how it's hitting me. And I also fiddle a lot with the exposure compensation, because you said something. I'm always looking at the histogram to make sure that I'm not losing any highlights or any shadows. And I'll make adjustments to the exposure compensation so that I make sure they get a little bit of everything. And in general, I'm shooting in RAW so that when I get home on the computer, if I need to pull something out a little bit in either end of the spectrum, I can do that.
That's a wonderful image right there.
I love this image. It just tickles me to death every time I see it. And it's on the wall in my study. Okay, so that's a little bit about how I work. And it didn't spring out of the thin air. And I wasn't always working as consciously in that way as I was at the beginning. So how did it all start? Well, in 1996, before I ever picked up a camera, I need to turn some light on here, I decided I wanted to learn how to draw. And a friend of mine recommended this book, this woman's book. Her name is Betty Edwards. She was a drawing teacher, an art teacher in California in the college system there. And she was really struggling early on with teaching students, her beginning students, how to draw. And she stumbled across a technique that she eventually went back to school, got her doctorate degree, and wrote a dissertation on it because it was so successful. And it became this book, Drawing on the Right Side of the Brain. I encourage all of you to consider getting it. I'm almost positive it's in the local library in your area, because it's a seminal work that's part of the core material that art students, painters and drawers and people who are in art programs, this is one of the things they read right off the bat because it's so important. And in the book, there's this image printed in the book in the 4th chapter in my edition, and it's printed in just this way. Just look at it for a second. Don't try and discern what it is. That is, don't try and find something you recognize and make the association and then go from there. Just look at the lines, especially the upper portion is a little easier to avoid trying to figure out what it is versus the bottom portion. Anyways, the exercise was, don't turn this right side up. Don't try and figure out what it is. Just spend an hour and draw it, and look carefully at all the individual pieces, where this line is in relation to that, the angles, all of that, and where all that placement is in relationship to the frame. And I was very dubious because I draw like stick figure. This is a contour drawing by Picasso of Stravinsky, the composer. So anyways, what was there to lose? I took the test, and this is what I got when I was done. And it really floored me. When I turned my image, which is on the right side up, so I could see what it was in comparison to what was in the book, it kind of blew all my circuits. And it was kind of one of those moments in your life when something happens and you're never the same afterwards. It was a life-changing moment, because I realized I didn't completely understand it, but I realized that there was another way to see that could let me do that with drawing. And it turns out her whole thing was, when something is viewed this way, the part of your brain that deals with the analytic, rational, logical side can't make heads or tails of it, and it sort of calms down a little bit and stops ruling the roost. And your intuitive side, the artistic side, the side that's less inclined to rationalism, can come into play, and it results in something like this. But if I toggle and show you it right side up, you immediately see the face, you immediately make recognition of the hands, the chair, the jacket, and in some ways, if you look at it a little bit, you can say, here you really see the shapes and lines, and here you see everything and recognize it, make the association, and you stop seeing it. And so the point is learning how to see something without naming it or bringing it to associations. So if you look at Cyrillic lettering, if you don't know how to read Cyrillic, it's just symbols and you see all the shapes. But if you know the language, you know what the words mean. You don't see the shapes, you see the associations with the words. So this was the first time I realized that there was something to be, something more to seeing than I knew. And these are some before and after images of people who attended 5-day workshops with the Drawing of the Right Side of the Brain people. The ones on the left were from the first day, and the ones on the right were from the 5th day. And it's pretty remarkable, the progress that people made in such a very short period of time. So she wrote that book. It was her dissertation. She got her doctorate degree, and she went on to be a famous art teacher, and is being taught in schools. Okay, so I tried to draw and learn how to draw for 2 years, and then I got involved with something else, another project that was non-art related. And for 3 years, I was totally focused on that, spending a lot of time, and I sort of left drawing in the dust. Then in 2003, we were going to go on vacation, and I got a digital camera. And when I came home, this was on the first day I walked to work, I took this picture. And when I got home, I rotated it on the computer and I adjusted the color saturations and contrasts, and I was just hooked. I thought, man, that looks like a painting, and I want to learn how to paint. So I could just paint with my camera. So for the next year, as I roamed through the city, walking to work and walking home 30 minutes each way, on the weekends I would go out for long, long walks. I started looking for puddles. I found a large puddle on my way to work that was there every time it rained. I would sit there for an hour on my way home and take photos of people walking by. Something that I saw in a lake up in Central Park in the fall. Something on 34th Street, the Empire State Building, in a puddle that was in the street. Um, Something I saw at a museum out in Oakland. More Union Square, where there's a farmer's market in a puddle. Something I saw when I was visiting my brother roaming the neighborhood. Somebody had a little pond, and the the windows from the house were reflecting in the pond, and it was just crazy, a crazy moment. I was like, wow, look at that. I visited relatives up in Vermont, and this is the Lamoille River and a reflection going on in the river, because I would walk the edge of the river from their house down 2 miles and then walk back. And I found that it wasn't just water. There were wet surfaces like metal plates in the roadway or sunglasses sitting on a vendor's table. This was a reflection. I took it through a window. There was a glass table. This reflection was playing on the table, and it was a vase and flowers above on a shelf. That reflection on the table, seen through the grass, created this very soft look to it that was very painterly. And through the course of all this, somebody said, and this was a reflection on the car hood. And while I was doing this, somebody said, your work really looks like pictorialism. And I was like, well, what's pictorialism? Well, I had to go find out. And I did. It was a major movement in photography in the late 19th and early 20th century, where people were taking images and then doing things to them that made them something more. They were fiddling with it in the darkroom with chemicals. They were printing it on an interesting kind of paper. They were stacking 2 or 3 images together to create this interesting surrealist look. They were double exposing. They were moving the camera, all different kinds of things. I was fascinated with it. Alfred Stieglitz was a big proponent of it. He was also one of the first people to really fight hard for photography as a fine art. Edward Steichen, Clarence White, a whole number of other people. I looked at all their work. I tried to find everything I could to read about them, both on the internet and in the library. And it was a fabulous learning process for me. And in the course of it, I started to learn something about the history of photography. But I couldn't find enough puddles to keep me happy. I didn't live in Seattle where it rained all the time. I lived in New York. So I was posting some things to a website, and I saw somebody who was doing still lifes with this shiny surface underneath it, and I asked him what it was, and he said it was Mylar paper. So I very quickly hit upon a method of dry mounting this sheet of shiny metallic paper on a 1/2-inch piece of foam board that was 15 by 20 with little strips of thin plastic carpet tape that would create a totally flat surface. And so for the next 5 years, I roamed around and did nothing but take reflections of pictures in that board. I joined a camera club later in New York, and somebody said, I know you. I've seen you walking around with that board. What the heck are you doing with that? This was one of the first images I took. It was at the Gates exhibit in Central Park in February 2005. When you hold the board in, when somebody holds the board for you, it's straight up. You're looking at it, it looks like what it looks like. But that's not how it works. I would walk around with the board in my left hand and my camera in my right. And if I bent the board down so I could get a reflection, just like in that book from Drawing on the Right Side of the Brain, it was upside down. And as you can see, when you look at something like this upside down, you can't quite make heads or tails of it, but you can certainly feel that vortex of that orange colored going in, and on the lines and the shapes coming in from the left and the right, and even that grayish area. Well, when you rotate it the other way around, you see it's a park bench, a pathway, it's the gates. There's a tree hanging uh, in the right-hand corner. For 5 years, I'm doing this and looking at it this way. It's taking that exercise and drawing the right side of the brain and repeating it again and again and again, and it becomes a deep school of learning how to see. It becomes so ingrained that it's intuitive. It's no longer an intellectual discussion. I'm looking at something, I'm feeling for the way something is shaped, the way all the pieces fit together. And this is a series of images that are taken with that board, something I saw in my kitchen at 6 o'clock in the morning one summer day. That's a fire extinguisher on the counter with the sunlight coming through. Tons of people in New York City, you see them all the time. The skating rink in Central Park, the shaving ice guy up in Washington Heights, roaming around with his little cart. I took it with me on vacations when we roamed around in the woods. I walked to work with it. There were street vendors selling fruit. A rose that I saw one summer, one lunch hour in November. It was the size of a softball. It was really amazing. And there's something about the way the paper and the light played that creates this very strong dimensional feel to it. The
Hey,
heart.
Warren, I
Mhm,
have one more question.
mhm.
Darlene wants to know what size board that was used with the Mylar.
It was 15 inches wide and 20 inches long. And I cut a piece of paper very close to that size to match it, so that when I laid the pieces, the strips of carpet tape, they're sticky on both sides. I pull the one side, lay all the tape down, and then pull all the other ones off and lay the piece of paper on it.
I think we all want one now.
Well, I actually have I have the board. It's around here somewheres, and I have instructions. Anybody
Awesome.
wants it? Um, Maybe I'll post those
Yes.
instructions to your Facebook page so that you can see it.
Please do. Thank
Okay.
you.
And then I'm going to go turn the other light on because I'm starting to fade out here. When you've heard enough, cut me off because I forgot to start timing myself. The Manhattan and Brooklyn Bridge from the seaport. Oops. Something I saw when we were roaming around in Chinatown on Canal Street. A little storefront with bags hanging. Flowers in the San Francisco fish market. So I did that for 5 years, and I realize now it was a very deep learning process. You can sort of get a sense of this if you've got a little one of those handheld mirrors that you look at yourself with in the bathroom. If you've got one of those, take it out. Just walk around the house and tilt it down and away from you and look at the reflections. You'll see it's upside down. It was a great learning school of composition and design, and doing it so much that you just stop thinking about it. Well, okay.
Warren, one more question. I'm sorry to interrupt, but
No, please do.
John Graff wants to know if this was taken with your compact or were you taking these with a DLSR?
Compact. It all had to be with a compact because the digital SLR, you can do it, but it's so heavy to hold that digital SLR in your one hand while you're trying to hold the board. You do that for about 10 minutes and your arms feels like it wants to fall off. And I mean, I would actually cramp up just using this, going on a 5-hour walk somewhere, or even the 30 minutes to work. So yeah, it's got to be the compact camera. It's your phone might work well.
Okay.
So I'm showing you things in sort of a linear form, but it's not how it actually happened. Lots of things were mixed together. They're happening at the same time, or they happened first, then something else happened, then I went back to something else. So it's all a wonderful mashup of where I'm working and learning and studying, and other people are saying things to me or directing me in certain ways that are leading to more self-study and more exploring and developing. I saw this book advertised in the Sunday review section. I was kind of curious, A Walker's Guide to the Art of Observation. So I bought it. She's an animal behaviorist, Alexandra Horowitz at Columbia. She wrote a book about how dogs see the world. And then she decided to do it for humans. And she walked her neighborhood with all kinds of different people, a doctor, a biologist, a typographer, a metallurgist, an entomologist. And she found that each one of them saw the world in a completely different way from the others based on what they spent their lives doing. But the one that she was most fascinated with was the walk she took with her 18-month-old son. This is me at about 18 months. And it looks like I'm holding a camera case, so it may have been preordained that I was going to end up here um, working with the camera. But she said she would go out the door with her son and they wouldn't get to the end of the block. It would take him an hour because he wanted to stop and look at everything, the cracks in the sidewalk, the design patterns on the wall, the birds that flew overhead, the fire engine truck that roared by. Everything fascinated him because he'd never seen it before. Kids at that age are like totally empty vessels, like visitors from Mars, who are just amazed and gobsmacked by it all. And it made me realize that's how we have to try and see. That we have to always be thinking about, well, what can I do to try and see like a child? So, for instance, kids are curious. So, on a walk in the neighborhood right after it rained one day, I decided I was going to go poke my nose in every garbage can in the park. And this is one of the things that I saw. The way the trash bag, the weight of the few things at the bottom of the trash bag plus the raindrops on the bag created a very interesting visual. Or just being gobsmacked and amazed by the way tilting glass and reflections from the buildings across the street might play. Something you see that you're just totally giddy because it's really light and shadow, literally. Or you get gobsmacked by a mannequin display in a window on a cloudy day with the street reflecting in it, and it creates a picture of Cruella de Vil walking down the street on 17th West 17th Street. The wonderful moment for only about 2 weeks in an apartment that I lived in for only 1 year during the winter, as the sun went over the buildings and the ridge across the street, the sunlight coming through the window would just disappear in this vaporous cloud and just become a blob of this lighter white on the wall. And it happened for 2 weeks, and I was there every day when it happened, and it was just mesmerizing. I just happened to notice it, and like a kid in a candy store, I just couldn't get enough of it. To be amazed by, this is a stain on a cement wall. And when I got out of the car and saw it, I just couldn't believe that I was looking at something that it sort of struck me as a waterfall, or had one of those Japanese drawing or painting looks or feel to it. I mean, it really just hopped out at me. Or wonky arrangements of little pathways. This was a second floor, the building, an opening in the between the two buildings. They had torn off the face of one of them. I came around the corner, and with the shadows playing in that, for a second I was disoriented. I couldn't quite figure out, and I thought, yeah, that was a seeing as a child moment, or something I saw at a beach in Gloucester, Massachusetts. I've become, in the course of doing all this work, and I've looked at all my work over 17 years, I realized there are certain things that I've become sensitized. I think visual specialists call it special enhancement. That is, you learn that there are certain things that you're attracted to or reverberate with you or speak you in some way, and you start to see them again and again and again. And I constantly see the human form in places. Okay, so there was more studying. I posted a list of some of my favorite books on your Facebook page. These are amongst them. Lots of good, interesting discussions about the art of seeing, about design and composition. The middle book by Bruce Barnbaum is a fabulous book. He talks a lot about the graphic design elements, but then what they do to us and how they resonate with us. Letting Go of the Camera, Bruce Jensen is the editor of Lenswork magazine, high-end photo magazine. Every month he writes a little editorial piece to it. He compiles them into a book. This letting go of the camera was another one of those moments that changed my life. The Art and Fear, Seeing is Forgetting, The Name of Things One Sees, about Robert Irwin, who was a famous realist painter who then became an abstract artist, who then became an artist who was trying to paint outside of the boundaries of the canvas, who finally gave up painting completely and got involved in installations and creating them in such a interesting and provocative way that sometimes you couldn't tell what you were looking at. So it's fabulous to read through how he came to that. And it made me all realize, working through some of these books, that there's an aspect to the visual world that I really respond to, and that's the formalism of the visual world, or formalism in photography. It's where form takes priority over subject matter. It's about the visual nature of something as opposed to its narrative content or a relationship to something you recognize in the visible world. It's all about line, form, color, and composition first, and all that other stuff second. Something I saw at an airport in Seattle, and I look through my work, and there's tons of it. I mean, it just keeps hopping out at me. A building in downtown Montgomery, the Juliet Hampton Morgan Library, the stairwell that goes upstairs, something that I saw out on Highway 31 running up to Prattville. Just the arrangement. And I was driving along, and I turned to the right, and I saw the color first, and then I saw the arrangement of the windows. Something I saw at breakfast, my orange juice on the counter, and the lights playing through the dish drainer off to my left, and the way the light was bouncing off of the glass. I took my brother-in-law to the hospital for some sort of doctor's visit. He didn't have a car, so I waited for him for an hour while he was inside, and I went up to the top of the parking garage. This is at Baptist South in Montgomery, and as I was looking over, I saw this, and it was just this moment of sort of surreal wonkiness. Another, they tore the side of a building off, and the walls were still there. A sidewalk that I saw. There's just endless ways that line, form, color, these graphic elements keep showing themselves to me, and I keep responding to them over and over and over again. It runs through all of my work. And I realized when I started looking at some of my other photos that actually the images I just showed you are really sort of strong representational images of that kind of thing, but it's really present in everything that I'm taking. This is a view of an alleyway, but there's line and form and shape and circles. The arrangement of these chairs at a museum as I'm looking down from the third floor. Something that I see walking some property in a friend outside of Troy, Alabama, and the way the shape of the curve of the water line, the diagonals, the verticals of the trees and the reflection, the different colors that are going on. Same thing here, lots of diagonal lines plus that fabulous light that was bouncing off the windows across the street. And this guy drove into the scene while I was up at the top of this parking garage to create this very interesting visual.
Warren, one more question.
Yeah.
Darlene and John, they missed the type of camera, compact camera that you
Sure.
have. Can you just mention that again?
Yep, here it is. Hopefully you can see it. Let's see, I'll put it right up there. It's a Sony RX3 100. It's version 7. It's their latest version. It's not cheap, but it has almost all of the firepower of a digital SLR. The processor in this camera is almost as big. It has all the bells and whistles of, aperture priority, and there's a bunch of filters in there that I really haven't fiddled with too much, but there's all kinds of creative filters as well. It's a fabulous camera. It's just not cheap. Save all my pennies and buy it about every 6 years. Ice in the sink and the way it just wraps around in an interesting pattern. We're driving out to Costco, and Janice and I see this flock of starlings zooming around, and so we pull over into a parking lot and jump out, and then all of a sudden they all land on these power lines right in front of us. Just these magical moments of visual connection. And this is a more standard fall scene, but I have it here because when I saw it, there was a lot of compositional element going on here. The way the line of the dam runs across, the reflection of the colors, all the verticals in the trees, the white playing against the darker background, the foreground. So anyways, there's all that and all kinds of work. Okay, so in 2011 or 12, I was searching on Amazon. I did this on Amazon and on Google, seeing, photography and seeing, how we see. And during one of those searches, the book in the left-hand corner came up, The Practice of Contemplative Photography, Seeing the World with Fresh Eyes. These 4 books are written by the people who wrote that first book. And they're part of something called the Mixon Institute, Miksang. Mixon is Tibetan for good eye, and it turns out these folks are Buddhists, and they've sort of learned to take their more contemplative approach to life and apply it to the camera work. I was fascinated by the title, and on the backside there was a pull quote from Jay Micel, who's one of my favorite New York photographers. So I got it, and as I read through the books, I realized that they were putting into words the way that I had been working right from the very beginning. And so it was a very helpful learning experience. I decided to go and take some workshops with them, and I sort of studied with them for 4 years. And it's contemplative. And I when people say, well, what kind of photographer are you? And I generally say, well, I either say I'm not a photographer, I'm a student of seeing, or I say I'm a contemplative photographer. And they're like scratching their heads. So what is contemplative photography? It's about being still and being quiet and paying attention to everything that you're seeing as you walk through the world, like another one of these wonky hood reflections while we were down at the beach. It's practicing seeing in this quiet, still way that helps set up the conditions for visual revelation, where things manifest in some way and then connect with your sensibilities. And the whole idea is to try and find a way to get out of the way of what you see and your sensibilities, so that that connection can happen. It's about not imposing your vision on the world, but instead letting the connections happen, like I said, with your sensibilities without getting in the way. You have to try and put aside all of your internal discussion when you go out the door or when you're seeing something, and get rid of your thoughts. Stop worrying about whether you're going to get a good picture, or is this going to be successful, or am I going to win any prize with this, and just go looking. And in the course of practicing in this way, I've discovered that I lose myself in the moment to moment process of seeing. And I've read some things about Charlie Parker and Coltrane, 2 great jazz artists, who they were improvisational artists. That is, they would just start playing and then they would riff. And it turns out a lot of how they did that was just getting lost in the moment-to-moment process of what was unfolding. That's how they work. It's how painters work. It's getting immersed in what they're looking at, what's right there in front of you, so completely that you fall into a zone, or the artists call it the flow state. And it's, anyways, studying with these guys was very helpful because it put to words and practice how I had been working, and it sort of bumped everything up to a whole nother level. So I've continued to study. The Mixon people said, live as much as you can, read as much as you can, and practice looking as much as you can. And then I would add, when you've done all that, try and forget all of it and just go look, because if you study and work hard enough and long enough, it becomes so ingrained in how you move through the world that it's no longer a conscious thought about what you're doing. You just go look, and I find I step out the door, I take a few deep breaths, and I just start sliding away. The world disappears. I don't know what time it is. I don't know how long I've been out there. I'm just moving through the world and seeing it And these moments of connection just keep happening. And, I've kind of, growing up, I was a meat and potatoes kind of guy. I didn't have an artistic bone in my body. I was a jock in school. I played sports. I can't draw. And it all sounded a little, as I was reading through their stuff, it all sounded a little, I'm kind of really a hardcore materialist kind of guy, the real world, show me the real world. But it works. It works for me. I keep just moving through the world and keep having these moments. And so I know it works. Okay, so the other thing that I found really helpful was to study how to draw, how to paint. Joseph Albers wrote a book called Interaction of Colors, a famous book about how colors interact. It's worth reading because as photographers, color comes to play in all that we do. The drawing from observation is about exactly what it says. There are things to be learned in that process. And Mitchell Abalo, who's a landscape painter, also had a book that I really liked a lot because it went into detail about tonal values and color and all sorts of things. So I decided to try and go back to learning how to draw. I found a teacher here in Montgomery who teaches an observational method of seeing. And these are some images from a class. And then I started trying to draw pastels based on things we were looking at in class. And this is some of the work from that. And then I decided I wanted to see if I could apply it to paint. And these are some acrylic paintings that I did. And in the course of it, learned a lot about seeing. And I think most importantly, learned an even deeper way than I had been experiencing before of how to slow down and really look deeply. And in the course of slowing down and looking deeply, you sort of lose yourself. And in that moment, the pathway opens between your sensibilities of who you are and what you're looking at. Okay, I'll wrap up here with the last set of images. Working in the way that I do, I always felt like I couldn't possibly create a project or a series of images that would hold together as a body of work. It's not how I work. I tried going through and looking at what I've done and see if I could cull things together, but it just doesn't quite work. And a lot of galleries and some shows, that's what they're looking for. And I just learned to not get too worked up about not submitting to those kinds of places because I just don't have the work for it. But last month in June, 2 months ago, a friend of mine from Seattle called me and said, we're doing a fundraiser for my photo gallery. For $25, everybody will go out for 2 days on a weekend and shoot whatever they see. At the end of the weekend, you turn in 5 images and one of them will get posted online and we'll have our online reception. And it's a fundraiser for the gallery. And I said, sure, I'll spring for the $25. So I did it. I started roaming my neighborhood like I always do. And I came across a little patch of canna lilies. And I don't know why, but I decided to fiddle with the black and white filter on my camera. And so these images were taking at that. And I realized I've been back there many, many times since then, and this is from that work. And I realized that it is about the canna lilies, but it's really about the same patch of canna lilies with various moments of lighting and shade and pattern. And it's really more about the changes that happen to this patch. I can stand there in any particular morning and the light changes constantly. And then from week to week, the light's changing. And sometimes there's no light, there's just no shadows. So it's been very exciting for me because it's the first time I've actually been able to work in a way that creates a body of work like this. So maybe I can do this. Maybe I can work in the way that I like to work and produce a body of work like that. I don't know. We'll find out. And this is Bart and Bill and Freddie. And they say, don't be afraid to slow down and look and be curious. It won't kill you. And you never know what you might see when you're out there looking. So that's it.
Thank you very much.
Oh,
that was
that was
awesome.
Thanks.
Yay.
That was awesome.
Oh, that was real good. Real good.
I knew that would be exciting, but does anyone have any questions that they were keeping till the very end?
No, I just want to say that, this has been one of my biggest issues was everything that I do looks so staged and I don't have the eye for it. So this is really, in essence, opened my eyes and given me a lot of
Yeah.
ideas.
Was that Susan speaking?
Yeah. Sorry, that was me.
You have to give me your name. I can't. The voices, but and I think that's one of my biggest takeaways is that I was explaining to Warren yesterday is that, you know, you see where everybody goes and all the pictures that they take, and you go out with some kind of, I guess, just a vision kind of pre-created in your head of what, you know, that you want to get a photo. And although perspectives are different, you know, you're still coming back with that same photo. And so anyway, but this just opens my mind and my eyes to, you know, really just slow down and, you know, take my time and, you know, try and figure out what I like about it and try and capture that. So,
You know,
Yeah.
some of the best photography over the course of the history of photography was done in the way that you describe it, which is somebody had an idea what they were looking for. They sort of thought they knew where they could find it, and they went out and they searched for it, and or they created, like Ansel Adams. He was not only a master of composition, but he was one of the best skilled darkroom artists ever. And people who go to the same spots he did can never reproduce what he reproduced, because it was, in addition to what he saw, it was also the work in the darkroom. So the point is, there's lots of really good stuff that's produced in that way. I would just say that if you work strictly in that way, then what happens is you go out with blinders on. You're not recognizing the potential that there might be something out there that will leap out at you if you're just looking and looking everywhere. You see a little sliver of light, you see a little play of shadow and light on the ground, something catches your eye, a little curiosity, or you decided, you know, I never looked in a trash bin before, I'm going to go over and take a peek at it, or you start staring at the rust on the side of the building, or anything that you might normally say, oh, that's awful, that's ugly, and I rule it out. So stop ruling anything out. Don't rule anything in, don't rule anything out, just go look. And for me, the proof is in the pudding. It's like, okay, I look at my work and I think, well, there are some images here I just love. I just love that. And I just don't have a creative mind, but I do somehow I've been able to create a work method that just allows me to relax and not fuss or worry about it. I'm not angling to. I love to get into shows, but if I never get in another show and I just keep going out and having fun with my camera every day, and boy, when I go out and I slip into that awareness, I can feel myself sliding in. It's pretty wonderful, because it's a really calm, quiet place in what is otherwise a really crazy, busy world for me.
well, I think
I
I
like
speak for
to.
everybody. It's a fantastic method, and I mean, you have aced it, so you do a
Yeah.
great job. So,
Yeah.
so
I
I'm
like
glad
to.
you liked it.
Yeah,
So
this is Leanne. I looked at some of your photographs before the webinar, and I loved the shadows and the reflections, because that was something that always speaks to me. Is you know, when you have the crisscross shadows and things like that, it was just like, okay, I can do this. I don't have to throw those out. You know, they're interesting, but not photo worthy. And so you
Well,
just changed my mind.
yeah, so they spoke to you, right? And they attracted
Yes,
your
they
attention, and
did.
you've discovered that you have a certain sensitivity to that sort of thing. You know, everything that I have tons of images that I adore, but they're never going to see the light of day, because in the general grand scheme of the world and art and photography and things that are, you know, somebody is arbitrarily deciding subjectively what's in and out of a show. And I've submitted pieces that in some shows win first prize, and in other shows they don't even get in, and it's totally subjective. So the ones that I think might fit I might submit those, and the rest I just personally enjoy, or I put them on my website and let other people look at them and see what they think. But so it's kind of a, you know, a toggle, a play with what you do with submissions for shows or exhibits or the club, and then what happens just in your own personal work that you know, makes you happy and really excites you visually.
Hey, Warren,
Yeah.
I noticed that on the website it says it's being recorded. Can we go back and look at this again? I'd like to look through the whole thing again.
Bob, I recorded it, and I hope you don't mind us posting it for the ones that couldn't make it tonight.
I
So
think that's a fabulous idea.
Okay,
I
good.
did miss the first few minutes because I forgot to hit record, but you know, so some things never change. So so just don't count on the first few minutes of the presentations.
Would that presentation be downloadable?
It will be, yes.
Okay, because
So,
I'd love to have a copy of it.
well, just don't depend on the first 5 minutes. So yeah, so it will be available once I figure out how to get it from A to B. So yes. So,
You know, I have to tell you all that once I sort of got started in on this, like I said, I really was kind of meat and potatoes, and then things started to happen, and like a family tree, the different lineages of where things went and where it took me. I look back at it now, and I think, wow, it sort of blows my circuits thinking about where I was in 2003 and where I am today, and all the different things that have happened, and in the course of it, all the different people I've met and the things I got involved in. I couldn't have asked for anything better to happen to me. Given all the other craziness in the world, I'm just really, you know, tickled about how this has helped change my life.
we really enjoyed your presentation,
Yes, very
Yeah.
much.
and I do have one takeaway that, well, I have more than one takeaway. I've already told you about 10, but one other takeaway is that when you're shooting portraits or you're trying to shoot people, you know, you tend to want to go early morning or in the golden hour. This gives us reason to go out in the bright sun and catch these shadows and opportunities that, you know, you may sit around and think, well, you know, it's not a great time to go out midday and try and shoot or whatever, but it gives us reason to get out midday and start looking for shadows and lines and that sort
And
of
when you
thing.
get hung up at the playground waiting for your grandkids, or you're in the grocery getting driven crazy because the people are taking so long, just take a couple of deep breaths and start looking around, because I've come up with some very interesting things standing in a grocery line waiting, you know, stewing, and then saying, okay, hey, I'm going to be stuck here. There's nothing that's going to make it go faster. What can I do to sort of occupy myself? And I start looking around, and then I slip away, and it's like, okay, I managed to survive that without blowing a coronary.
Good idea. Well, thank you very much for
Okay.
being a part of our meeting. And
I'm so glad
Yeah.
you guys asked me
Thank
to
you,
come. I
Warren.
really appreciate
Oh,
it.
Warren, great. Thank you so much.
Really good.
Okay,
hey
great.
guys, if y'all have any, does anybody have any other questions that they would like for me to answer about the
Nope.
club, about what's going on, what's not going on? You know, we'll keep you posted on the Facebook page and through emails, and we're looking to just start getting everything reorganized, and hopefully in about a month we're going to have a new website. So I will we'll get our next meeting set up, and it's going to be Ann Strickland and Ian Perkins that's going to present to us. So that should be exciting as well.
Oh, that'd be
Okay.
good. Yeah.
All right. Well,
Okay,
y'all
thank
have a
y'all.
good week. Okay. And I enjoyed
Bye.
seeing y'all all.
Okay,
Bye.
thank you.
Bye.
Bye bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Good.
Bye.
Bye-bye.